Well, look, I think the Chinese banks as well as the Chinese internet stocks have both rallied pretty significantly already and were some of the earlier beneficiaries from the policy announcements as well as all the excitement around DeepSeek and China AI's uprising. I actually think that the key to monitor is actually whether the property sector continues to stabilize, not necessarily in terms of volume pickup on primary sales, but certainly in terms of price stability overall. If prices stabilize, that means that property developers' margins will have bottomed, and that's a sector that actually nobody's wanted to touch for a very, very long time. But more importantly, it has knock-on effects in terms of consumer sentiment, wealth effect, and I think China consumer names are actually a massive laggard that got totally pummeled last year. It was really gruesome price performance that hopefully will have some room to recover this year. And some China cyclicals as well, some high-tech, industrials, etc. If the economy picks up and the trade war isn't too bad, then I think those will potentially have a catch-up opportunity as well. So we would prefer those over banks or internet stocks at this point.
Helen, when we talk about the wealth effect, that also is spurred on by the performance in the Chinese markets. It has outperformed. We were looking at the MSCI China up as much as 20% last week. Has given back a little bit, but in all the I guess you could say the FaceTime that President Xi is giving to the multinational entrepreneurs, the CEOs, what is that doing to boost confidence?
I think that definitely has some positive impact. For example, we spoke to a number of domestic investors in the recent weeks in the public as well as private market. We're hearing that entrepreneurs are starting to want to come out and start up their companies again. And so this whole concept of no lying flat that President Xi has been emphasizing over time, I think that's really been substantiated through all of the policy announcements as well as all the media press events of late. So that's positive feedback, hopefully virtuous feedback loop starting to form. But I do think that we need some time to see the consumer confidence stabilize because people indeed are still quite worried. And, the domestic market has been more resilient, but also has not really rallied to a significant extent, not nearly the amount of rally or returns that we've seen in the Hong Kong market. Of course, that's partly fueled by the southbound Stock Connect liquidity this year as well, but that in itself is not going to be enough. We need to see probably a bigger rally in the A-share market and also money moving from the fixed income market, where domestic investors have been very focused over the last year and a half, back into the equity market. And that's already started to reverse itself over the last 1 or 2 months, which I think is a positive sign of greater confidence in the economy.
And what would spur on and bring on a greater rally in the Chinese markets? Would it be maybe not such a harsh policy coming through from President Trump on the trade front, or what do you think it needs to be?
Look, I think the trade front really makes a huge difference, right? It's not necessarily that Chinese GDP is so reliant on exports to the U.S. In fact, it's just low single digit of GDP versus, for Mexico, for Canada, some of those other markets are much more reliant on the U.S. exports. But in terms of a sentiment perspective, it does have a big impact, right? And I think it's also tied to the concept of what happens in terms of China's strategic positioning in the high-tech space. And, all of these factors in terms of U.S. and China relations are actually interlinked, right? So, you give a little bit on the tariffs, you get a little bit less, on something else. So you have to look at the whole package and not just look at tariffs by itself. I'm sure there's many other geopolitical issues that are unrelated to the economy that are going to be tied into the broader negotiation as well.